She watched her family die and never spoke again. For 2 years, silence was her only shield, until the men who destroyed her life came back to finish the job. But this time, she's not alone. And when she finally speaks, everything changes. Subscribe now for more powerful Western stories that keep you watching till the end. The wind never stopped on the prairie. It whispered through tall, dry grass, like a voice that refused to be heard clearly. Always there, always restless. It carried dust, memories, and sometimes the past. Eliza Warren stood alone in that wind. 19 years old, though the weight in her eyes belonged to someone much older. Her boots were worn thin, her dress faded by sun and time, and her hands, once soft, were now rough with survival. She didn't move much, didn't speak at all. People in the nearby settlement had tried, once. "Girl, you all right? Where's your family? What's your name?" She never answered. Not because she couldn't, because she wouldn't. Before the silence, there was a time when Eliza's voice filled the air as freely as the wind itself. She used to laugh. Not the quiet kind, but the kind that made others turn their heads and smile without knowing why. Her mother used to say her laughter could make a bad day forget itself. Her father would pretend to complain about it, shaking his head with a grin. "Too loud for a proper lady," he'd tease, and she'd laugh even louder. Those days lived in motion, wagon wheels creaking across open land, campfires under endless skies, stories shared with other travelers chasing hope out west. They were part of a wagon train, a fragile line of dreams moving through a dangerous world. But danger didn't come from where they expected. It didn't come from storms or wild animals, or even strangers in the night. It came from within. Eliza remembered that night in fragments. Firelight dancing too wildly. Voices raised, not in laughter, but anger. Men arguing over supplies, over gold, over fear. Fear turned quickly. Fear always does. A gunshot cracked through the night, like the sky splitting open. Then another. Chaos followed. People she had eaten with, laughed with, trusted, became unrecognizable. Faces twisted by panic and greed. Hands reaching for weapons instead of help. Her father pushed her behind a wagon. "Don't move," he said. It was the last thing he ever told her. She saw him fall. She heard her mother scream. And then, silence. Not real silence, the kind that fills your ears when your world collapses too fast for your mind to understand it. Eliza didn't scream, didn't cry. She just stopped. Something inside her shut down, not gently, but completely. Like a door slammed so hard it shattered the frame. By morning, the wagon train was gone. Some dead, some fled. Some vanished into the horizon like ghosts. And Eliza was still there, alone. She buried them herself. It took all day. Her hands bled, her body ached, but she didn't stop. When it was done, she sat between the two graves, staring at the fading light. The world felt too big, too empty, too loud in all the wrong ways. She opened her mouth once, as if to call out, as if to beg for someone, anyone to answer. But nothing came, because deep down she already knew the truth. No one was coming. That was the moment she made her vow. Not out loud, not even in words, just a decision that settled into her bones. She would never speak again, because words had failed her, because trust had killed her family, because silence felt safer. And from that moment on, Eliza Warren disappeared, and something else took her place. The prairie is unforgiving. It doesn't care if you're grieving. It doesn't care if you're alone. It only rewards those who adapt, or destroys those who don't. Eliza adapted. At first she survived out of instinct, eating what little she could find, drinking from streams, sleeping lightly, always ready to run. But survival turned into skill. She learned how to track animals, not by being taught, but by watching, studying the ground, the broken twigs, the disturbed soil. She learned which plants healed and which ones harmed. She learned how to stay unseen. Silence helped. Without speaking, she became more aware. She listened differently. The crunch of distant footsteps, the shift of wind before a storm, the unnatural quiet that meant danger was near. Her world became sharper, clearer, but colder. Because while she learned how to survive, she forgot how to feel. The Ghost Girl. Eventually, she wandered close enough to a small settlement. Not by accident, but not by intention either. Hunger has a way of pulling you toward people, even when you don't want to be found. The first time someone saw her, she was standing near the edge of town, watching, silent, eyes too intense. A man approached carefully. "You lost, girl?" No answer. "Where you from?" Nothing. He stepped closer. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. It unsettled him. Word spread quickly. "There's a girl out there, doesn't talk, just watches." They started calling her something. The Ghost Girl. Not because she looked like one, but because she felt like one. Present, but not really alive. Some tried to help her, offering food, asking questions, reaching out. She accepted food sometimes, but never their words, never their concern. Because letting people in meant risking everything again, and she had already lost too much. Silence as a weapon. Over time, people stopped trying, and that was exactly what Eliza wanted. Her silence became more than protection. It became control. No one could lie to her if she didn't engage. No one could betray her if she stayed distant. No one could hurt her if she gave them nothing to hold on to. She moved like a shadow along the edges of the world, never staying too long, never trusting too much. And yet, there were moments, small ones, when the wind would shift just right, or the sky would burn gold at sunset, or a memory would slip through the cracks. And for a second, she would feel something, a flicker of the girl she used to be, the one who laughed, the one who believed in people. But those moments never lasted, because grief doesn't leave quietly. And when it returns, it demands silence. The truth about her silence. To anyone watching, Eliza looked strong, independent, untouchable. But strength and isolation are not the same thing. Her silence wasn't healing her. It was freezing her in the moment she lost everything. Every day she didn't speak. She stayed in that night, that fire, that loss. She wasn't moving forward. She was surviving in place. And deep down, a part of her knew it. But breaking the silence meant facing everything she had buried, the fear, the pain, the memories, and she wasn't ready. A shift in the wind. One evening as the sun dipped low and painted the land in shades of amber and shadow, Eliza paused. Something felt different. The wind carried more than dust this time. It carried presence. She turned slightly, not fast, not alarmed, just aware. And for the first time in a long time, she realized something. She wasn't alone. Not in the way she had been before. Somewhere beyond the tall grass, just out of sight, someone was watching. Not like the others. Not curious, not afraid. Just observing. Understanding. Eliza didn't run, didn't hide, but something inside her shifted. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. Because whoever was out there, they understood silence, and that meant one thing. Her world was about to change. The land remembered everything. Long before wagons carved scars into the prairie, before fences tried to divide what could never truly be owned. The elder spoke in its own language. Wind over grass, hooves against soil, rivers shifting their paths like quiet decisions. Most people never learned to listen, but Lakota did. A man shaped by the land. Lakota moved across the plains like he belonged to them, because he did. Every step he took was deliberate, measured, silent. Not the kind of silence born from pain, but from understanding. He didn't disturb the land. He read it. A bent blade of grass told him how recently someone had passed. A faint imprint in the dirt revealed weight, speed, intention. Even the birds, when they scattered too suddenly, carried warnings. To others, it was emptiness. To him, it was a living map. Lakota was Lakota, a tracker, a hunter, a survivor of a world that was changing too fast and too violently. His people had once moved freely, guided by seasons and tradition. Now, they were being pushed, pressed, erased. He had seen villages burned, promises broken, families scattered like dust in a storm. And like Eliza, he had lost. But loss did not silence him completely. It refined him. Where others might have turned bitter or reckless, Lakota became something else. Focused, patient, quiet in a way that carried strength, not emptiness. The tracker's purpose. Lakota wasn't wandering without reason. For weeks, he had been following a trail. Not animals, men. Horse thieves, killers, men who left destruction behind them like a shadow that never faded. They moved carelessly, confident in their weapons, blind to the signs they left behind. But to Lakota, they were loud. Every crushed plant, every misplaced step, every careless fire. They thought they were hunters. They didn't realize they were being hunted. Lakota followed at a distance, never rushing. He understood something most didn't. Revenge taken too quickly becomes a mistake, and mistakes get you killed. So he waited, watched, learned, until the right moment revealed itself. The unexpected trail. One morning something changed. Lakota knelt low to the ground, studying the familiar marks left by the group he tracked. Boot prints, horses, drag marks from stolen supplies. But then, something else. Lighter, softer, different. He leaned closer. Narrow. Not a man. Not part of the group. A girl. Alone. That alone didn't make sense. No one traveled alone out here unless they had no choice or no fear. Lakota studied the prints more carefully. They weren't scattered or uncertain. They were precise, intentional. Whoever this girl was, she wasn't lost. She knew exactly where she was going. That made her dangerous, or broken. Sometimes, both. Following the unknown, Lakota adjusted his path, not abandoning his original target, but expanding it. Because in the wild, unexpected signs often lead to deeper truths. He followed the lighter trail with the same patience he used for everything else. He didn't rush, didn't assume. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. And then, he saw her. The first glimpse of Eliza. She stood in the distance, framed by endless grass and sky. Still, completely still. Not resting, not waiting. Just present. Lakota didn't move closer. He didn't need to. From where he stood, he could already see enough. Her posture wasn't careless. It was controlled. Her awareness wasn't obvious, but it was there. And her silence, it wasn't peace, it was something heavier. Lakota had seen that kind of silence before. In warriors who had lost too much. In survivors who carried memories they couldn't speak. In people who had crossed a line inside themselves and never came back the same. He watched her for a long moment. And in that moment, he understood something important. She wasn't prey, and she wasn't a threat. She was something else entirely. Two silences meet. Eliza felt him before she saw him. That same shift in the wind, that same awareness that had kept her alive for so long. She turned slightly, her eyes scanning the distance. And there he was, a figure standing still, watching, not approaching, not calling out, just there. Most people would have spoken, asked questions, demanded answers, but he didn't, and that changed everything. Because for the first time since her vow, someone didn't try to break her silence. They respected it. They stood like that for several moments. No movement, no sound, but something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. Dakota saw a girl who had turned silence into armor. Eliza saw a man who didn't need words to exist. And in that shared understanding, a connection began. Fragile, unspoken, but real. Dakota made a choice. He stepped back. Not forward, not toward her. Away. Because pushing would break something that wasn't ready. And he knew better than to force what needed time. Why he didn't speak. Dakota could have spoken. He knew some English. Enough to communicate. But he didn't. Because words in that moment would have been the wrong language. Words carry expectation. Questions demand answers. And Eliza wasn't someone who could be reached that way. So he chose silence. Not as absence, but as respect. The beginning of awareness. After that day, something shifted for both of them. Eliza continued moving, hunting, surviving. But now, she was aware of him. Not always visible, not always close, but present. And strangely, she didn't avoid it. Didn't run. Didn't disappear like she usually would. Because his presence didn't feel like danger. It felt like understanding. And that confused her. Because understanding meant connection. And connection meant risk. Dakota's curiosity grows. Dakota, too, found himself thinking about her. Not in distraction, but in curiosity. Who was she? Why was she alone? Why did her silence feel so heavy? He had seen many people survive loss, but this was different. This was someone who had chosen silence as a way of life. And yet, she moved with purpose, with skill, with awareness. She wasn't broken in the way most were. She was reshaped. And that made her someone worth understanding. A world about to collide. But the land never allows stillness for long, because while two silent souls were beginning to notice each other, something else was moving across the plains. The men Dakota had been tracking. Closer now, more dangerous, and completely unaware that their past was about to catch up with them. Because the girl they once left behind was no longer the same, and the man watching from the distance was already on their trail. The unspoken turning point. That evening, as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Eliza paused again. She didn't look around this time. She didn't need to. She simply knew he was out there, watching, not as a threat, not as a stranger, but as something else. Something she didn't have a name for. And for the first time in 2 years, Eliza didn't feel completely alone. The prairie had a rhythm. Not loud, not obvious, but steady. Wind in the morning, stillness at noon. Long shadows stretching across the land as the sun sank low. And within that rhythm, two lives, once completely separate, began to move in quiet alignment. Eliza no longer felt alone, and that was the most dangerous change of all. Days passed after their first encounter, but something had shifted in the space between them. Dakota never approached her directly, never crossed the invisible line that separated observation from intrusion. But he didn't disappear either. He was there, just beyond reach, a shadow among shadows, and Eliza noticed. At first, she treated him like any other presence, something to track, something to remain cautious of. Her instincts didn't allow trust to come easily. Every movement she made was still careful, calculated. But unlike others, he didn't chase, didn't speak, didn't try to pull her into a world she had already rejected. He simply existed, and that quiet respect began to change how she saw him. It happened on a cold morning, the kind where the wind cuts deeper, and even the yard feels harder beneath your feet. Eliza had struggled the night before, her fire too weak, her hunt unsuccessful. Hunger had returned, not as panic, but as a slow, gnawing reminder that survival was never guaranteed. When she woke, something felt different. She scanned the area instantly. Alert, ready. No immediate danger. But then she saw it. A small bundle, placed carefully near the edge of her camp. Not thrown, not hidden, left with intention. She approached slowly, every sense sharp. Inside the bundle, dried meat, preserved. Enough to last her a few days. Eliza froze. No footprints she didn't already recognize. No signs of struggle. Just a gift. Her eyes lifted toward the horizon. She didn't see him, but she knew. Lakota. Understanding the gesture, Eliza didn't touch the food immediately. Trust wasn't built that quickly. But something about the way it had been left, without demand, without expectation, felt different. This wasn't control. This wasn't manipulation. This wasn't a trap. It was communication. A message without words. I see you. I know your struggle. I don't want anything in return. That kind of message was unfamiliar to her. And unfamiliar things are often the hardest to accept. But hunger eventually won. And when she ate, it wasn't just survival. It was the first time in a long while that she accepted something from another human being. Her response. Days later, Eliza found something rare. A cluster of medicinal herbs growing near a shaded stream. Not easy to find. She paused, crouching low as her fingers brushed over the leaves. She knew what they were. Healing, useful, valuable. She could keep them, use them for herself. But instead, she did something unexpected. She gathered them carefully, tying them into a small bundle. And then she walked, not randomly, not aimlessly. She followed a path she knew Lakota would cross. And there, she left the bundle. No markings, no signal. Just placed it gently where it would be seen. Her own message. A conversation begins. When Lakota found the herbs, he didn't smile, not outwardly. But something shifted in his eyes. Understanding, respect. Because he knew what it meant. She wasn't just accepting his presence anymore. She was responding to it. That was the beginning. Not of trust fully formed, but of something growing. A connection built not through words, but through action. And in some ways, that made it stronger. Learning each other without speaking. From that point on, their interactions evolved. Still no direct contact. Still no spoken words. But their worlds began to overlap more intentionally. Lakota would leave signs, not obvious, not forceful. A trail subtly marked to guide her away from danger. A fire built in a safer location before a storm. A piece of cloth tied in a way that signaled direction. Eliza began to understand. Not immediately, but gradually. She learned his patterns. His methods. His way of thinking. And in return, she adapted. She followed his guidance, not blindly, but with awareness. Testing it, confirming it. And when it proved right, again and again, trust began to take root. The silent lessons. Lakota never stood in front of her and taught her directly, but he taught her anyway, through example, through presence, through quiet correction. One afternoon, Eliza tracked a deer but moved too quickly. The animal fled, gone before she could react. Frustration flickered across her face. That night, she found something. Tracks. The same deer. But this time, the path was marked. Not obviously, but intentionally slowed. Broken branches placed in a pattern. A route that accounted for wind direction, for noise, for patience. Lakota's work. A lesson. She followed it, carefully. And this time, she succeeded. More than survival. For the first time in a long time, Eliza wasn't just surviving. She was learning, growing, evolving. And more importantly, she wasn't doing it alone. Even if no words were spoken, Lakota's presence filled a space she had buried deep inside herself. a space that remembered what it meant to rely on someone, to connect, to not carry everything alone. But with that came something dangerous. Feeling. The return of emotion. First, it was subtle. A moment of calm when she noticed his tracks. A sense of reassurance when she followed a path he had marked. A strange awareness that someone was looking out for her. Then it grew. She found herself pausing longer than necessary, looking toward the horizon more often, wondering, not fearing, if he was near. And that was new, because for 2 years, she had built her entire existence on not needing anyone. And now, that foundation was beginning to crack. Lakota felt it as well. Though he didn't show it openly, he found himself adjusting his path, not just to track the men he hunted, but to remain aware of her, to ensure her safety, to guide without controlling. And that wasn't something he had planned, but it was something he chose. Because in Eliza, he saw more than a survivor. He saw strength buried under silence. He saw someone who had endured and still stood. And that deserved protection, not out of pity, but out of respect. But trust, especially unspoken trust, is fragile, because it hasn't been tested yet, and the world has a way of testing things at the worst possible moment. Eliza didn't know everything about Lakota, and Lakota didn't know everything about her. Their connection was real, but incomplete. And incomplete trust can be dangerous, because when the past returns, it doesn't ask if you're ready. One evening, as the sky dimmed and the air grew colder, Lakota noticed something that made him stop. Tracks. Fresh. Heavy. Multiple men. Moving fast. Moving carelessly. Too close. He crouched low, studying them carefully. And then he recognized the pattern. The same group he had been tracking. The same men responsible for destruction across the plains. They were near, closer than before, and moving in a direction that made his chest tighten slightly. Toward her. The calm before the storm. Eliza, unaware of the exact danger, still felt something shift. The land felt different. The wind carried tension. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was waiting. She stood still, scanning the distance. For the first time since their connection began, she felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, but concern. Not for herself, for him. Because even without words, she knew something was coming. A bond that will be tested. Their silence had built something rare, something real. But now, that silence would be tested. Because what's coming next can't be handled without truth. And sometimes, silence isn't enough to save you. The land had gone quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet Eliza had grown used to. Not the calm stillness of early morning or the soft hush of dusk. This quiet felt wrong, heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Eliza stood near a dry ravine, her eyes scanning the horizon. The wind moved through the earth, but even that seemed slower, cautious. Her instincts had been warning her for hours. Something was coming. And this time, it wasn't just a feeling. Miles away, Lakota crouched low, his fingers brushing over the ground. Fresh tracks. Too many. Too careless. Boots dug deep into the dirt. Horses driven hard. Signs of impatience, of men who believed they had nothing to fear. But Lakota knew better. These men didn't move like hunters. They moved like men who had already gotten away with too much. His jaw tightened slightly. He followed the trail faster now, though still controlled. His mind worked ahead of his steps, calculating distance, direction, timing. And then, he saw something that stopped him cold. A piece of cloth. Torn. Caught on a low branch. Old, but not forgotten. He recognized it, not from his own past, but from hers. The past reveals itself, Dakota had seen enough signs over the past days to understand one thing. Eliza wasn't just surviving randomly. She was shaped by something violent, something specific. And now, standing there with that torn fabric in his hand, everything aligned. The men he had been tracking were the same men who had destroyed her life. Not a guess, not a possibility, a certainty. His eyes darkened, not with rage, but with clarity. This wasn't just a hunt anymore. This was a collision. Eliza recognizes the mark. Back at the ravine, Eliza moved carefully along the edge, her steps light but deliberate. She was tracking too, though she didn't know it yet. Her eyes caught something in the dust. A mark. Faint, but unmistakable. Her breath hitched, not loudly, but enough. She knelt down slowly, her fingers hovering just above it. A boot print, but not just any boot. A specific cut, a worn edge, a pattern burned into her memory so deeply it had never faded. Her chest tightened. The world around her blurred, not physically, but emotionally, because in that single moment, she was no longer standing in the present. She was back there. Memory as a weapon. Firelight. Screams. Gunshots. Her father falling. Her mother reaching for her. The same boots walking past her as she hid. Pretending she didn't exist. Pretending she wasn't worth finishing. Her hands trembled. Her breathing grew uneven. But still, no sound came out. Because her vow still held her. Even now. Even when everything inside her was breaking again. Dakota moves to warn her. Dakota didn't waste time. He changed direction immediately, cutting across the land with precision. His pace was faster now, not reckless, but urgent. He needed to reach her before they did, because he understood something she didn't yet fully grasp. This wasn't chance. These men weren't just passing through, they were searching. And whether they realized it or not, they were closing in on her. Silence begins to crack. Eliza stood slowly, her gaze fixed on the tracks. More of them now, clearer, closer. Her mind raced, but her voice remained trapped. For years, silence had protected her, kept her steady, kept her in control. But now, it was doing something else. It was holding her back, because she needed to act, needed to think beyond instinct, needed to communicate. But she couldn't, or wouldn't. The line between those two had blurred long ago. The encounter. They found her at the edge of the ravine. 4 men, armed, confident, cruel. Their presence shattered the fragile balance of the moment. Their laughter carried across the dry yard, sharp and mocking. "Well, look at this." One of them stepped forward, squinting slightly. I knew I recognized that face. Eliza didn't move, didn't speak, but her body betrayed her, just slightly. A tightening of her shoulders, a shift in her stance. They saw it, and they remembered. "You're the girl," another one said, a grin spreading slowly. "The one who ran. The one they didn't finish." Trapped between then and now. Time folded in on itself. Eliza stood there, but part of her was still that terrified girl hiding behind a wagon. Her heart pounded, her vision sharpened, her body prepared to move. But her mind was caught in the past. Because trauma doesn't fade, it waits, and when it returns, it takes control. Dakota watches from the shadows. Dakota arrived just in time to see the situation unfold. He didn't rush in, didn't act blindly, because 4 armed men against 1, even for him, was a risk that needed precision. He studied their positions, their spacing, their attention, and most importantly, her. She wasn't fighting, not yet. She was frozen, and that was the real danger. When silence becomes a cage. One of the men raised his gun casually, pointing it toward her, not in panic, but in control. "Should have finished the job," he muttered. Eliza's breath caught. Her body tensed. Everything inside her screamed to move, to run, to fight, to do something. But her silence held her in place. Because for 2 years, she had trained herself not to react, not to speak, not to engage. And now, that survival instinct was turning into a trap. From the shadows, Lakota made a small movement. A signal. Subtle. Precise. Something only someone aware would notice. A shift of position. A reflection of light. A warning. Eliza saw it. Barely. But enough. Her eyes flickered for just a second. And in that second, something changed. Because she realized something critical. She wasn't alone. Not this time. The man's finger tightened slightly on the trigger. "End of the road," he said. The others watched, amused, relaxed, certain. Because to them, she was still that silent, broken girl. And silence to them meant weakness. They were wrong. But Eliza hadn't proven that yet. Everything inside Eliza collided. Fear, grief, rage, and something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Choice. For years, she believed silence was her only option, her only protection. But now, standing at the edge of death, she saw the truth. Silence hadn't saved her. It had only delayed this moment. And if she stayed silent now, she would lose everything, again. The wind shifted. The world narrowed. Pressed tighter. Lakota tensed, ready to move. But waiting. Because the next second would decide everything. And Eliza, for the first time in 2 years, opened her mouth. Time slowed to a breath. The man's finger tightened on the trigger. Dust drifted through the air in slow spirals. The ravine stood still, like the world itself was watching, waiting. Eliza didn't move. Not yet. Her body was tense, her heartbeat loud in her ears, her mind caught between past and present. For 2 years, silence had been her shield, her escape, her control, but now it felt like chains. The edge of death. The man smiled slightly, the kind of smile that came from power, from certainty. "You ain't running this time," he said. His voice echoed, harsh against the empty land. The others stood relaxed. To them, this wasn't a fight. It was a conclusion. A loose end finally tied. Eliza's breathing grew shallow. Her hands trembled, not weak, but overwhelmed. Because everything was happening again. The same men, the same danger, the same moment where everything could be taken from her. And once before, she had stayed silent. The truth she could no longer ignore. But something was different now. Not around her. Inside her. Because she wasn't that same girl anymore. She had survived, learned, adapted, and most importantly, she had changed. Lakota's presence, his silent guidance, the connection they had built without words, it had done something she never expected. It had reminded her she wasn't alone in the world, and she wasn't powerless. The voice beneath the silence. Deep inside her, something stirred. Not fear, not grief, something buried under years of silence. Her voice. Not just the ability to speak, but the will to be heard. For so long, she believed speaking meant vulnerability. That words would expose her, weaken her, betray her. But now she understood something else. Silence had protected her once, but it wasn't meant to last forever. Because silence, when held too long, becomes a prison. Lakota waits for the moment. From the shadows, Lakota watched carefully. Every muscle in his body was ready. Every movement calculated. He would strike. But not yet. Because he saw it. The shift in her. The change in her stance. The moment where survival could turn into strength. And he understood something crucial. This wasn't just about saving her life. This was about her reclaiming it. The breaking point. The man exhaled slowly, and began to squeeze the trigger. "Should have ended you back then," he muttered. And in that exact moment, everything inside Eliza snapped, not into fear, into clarity. The first word. Her lips parted, her chest tightened, her voice, unused, raw, fragile, forced its way out. Stop. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it cut through the moment like lightning. Silence shatters. The men froze, not because of the word itself, but because of what it meant. The girl they remembered, the silent, broken survivor, had just spoken. Their confidence cracked, just for a second, and that second was everything. Lakota strikes. Before they could react, Lakota moved, fast, precise, silent no longer. He came from the side, using speed and surprise as his weapons. His first strike dropped the man closest to him before a sound could escape. The second turned, raising his gun. Too slow. Lakota closed the distance instantly, disarming him with controlled force. The third fired. A shot echoed across the ravine, but it missed, because Eliza moved. Eliza fights back. Something had changed in her, completely. The fear that once froze her, now fueled her. She grabbed a nearby rock, her movements sharp, instinctive. The man who had aimed at her barely had time to react before she struck. Not blindly, not wildly, but with purpose, with years of buried anger behind it. This wasn't just survival. This was release. The final man. The last man stumbled back, panic replacing arrogance. This ain't right," he muttered, because nothing was going the way it had before. The silent girl was no longer silent. The easy target was no longer helpless. Lakota stepped forward, calm but deadly. The man ran, but he didn't get far. The fight ends. And just like that, it was over. The wind returned, the silence came back. But this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, free. After the storm, Eliza stood there, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from everything she had just released. 2 years of silence, 2 years of pain, everything inside. And now, it was out. Not completely, but enough. She dropped the rock. It hit the earth with a soft thud, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel trapped. Lakota approaches. Lakota walked toward her slowly, not as a savior, not as a stranger, but as someone who understood exactly what she had just gone through. He stopped a few steps away, gave her space, because this moment belonged to her. The second time she speaks, Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, not just as a presence in the distance, but as the one who had stayed, who had guided her, who had never forced her to speak, but had given her a reason to. Her voice came again, soft, unsteady, but stronger than before. "It's over." 2 simple words, but they carried everything. More than survival. Lakota didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to, because he understood this wasn't just the end of a fight. It was the end of something much deeper. The end of her silence as a shield. The end of her past controlling her present. The end of being defined by what she lost. A new beginning. The sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the ravine. Eliza stepped forward slightly, not running, not hiding. Moving. Choosing. For the first time in years, her future didn't feel like something she had to endure. It felt like something she could shape. And Lakota walked beside her. Not leading, not following, just there. The meaning of her voice. Eliza didn't suddenly become someone who spoke all the time. Her silence didn't vanish completely. But it changed. It was no longer fear, no longer pain. It became a choice. And that made all the difference. Final image. 2 figures walking across the open prairie, the wind moving around them. The world wide and uncertain, but no longer empty, because sometimes it takes losing everything to finally find your voice.